All right, so I said we would be joined now by Mark Gallagher. I'm sure you will have checked on the running order as to Mark Gallagher's background, but just in case you missed it, he is a man who spent 15 years on the management boards of Jordan Grand Prix and then the Red Bull Formula One team. He's a former managing director of one of the most legendary engine manufacturers in motor racing history, which is, of course, the Cosworth Formula One engine company. He now runs his own Formula One business and has written 3 books on winning and on business, including the most recent one, The Business of Winning, Transformation from the Formula One track to the boardroom. And he is our keynote speaker for this afternoon. As always, any questions, do please get them in and we'll try to cover as many as is possible. In the meantime, please welcome Mark Gallagher.
That's great. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. And it's a great pleasure to be part of this afternoon's session. I'm actually just listening to the introduction and realizing that today of all days is actually the 30th anniversary of the first ever Formula One race for the Jordan Grand.
I don't know if, luckily, there's not many of the topics so far that we've covered that I would have any expertise on, but I would be able to finish the rest of that sentence, which was that it was the continuation of the first race of the Jordan Grand Prix team. A team which, if I have it right, gave Michael Schumacher his start in Formula One before he was poached by Benetton, and on top of that was responsible for dragging Eddie Irvine from Formula Nippon in Japan, where the big challenge was getting him his super license so that he could even go Formula One racing, and which went on to be one of the most remarkable success stories as an upstart entrepreneurial Formula One team before, I think, ultimately becoming Jaguar Racing, if I'm correct. And of course, Mark was intimately involved with all of that. Much better that you would hear this from him, though, than you would hear it from me. So I think we have Mark lined back up, and he can correct me on whether I got the data right on Eddie Irvine and Michael Schumacher being there for that first season. Back over to you, Mark.
Yeah, no, he wasn't. Apologies for disappearing there. I was coming out in sympathy with Jerry earlier on. So a great pleasure to. Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So I was just really getting into the point I wanted to really start on, which is that from a leadership point of view, Formula One is all about running a technology business in which we have to innovate. We have to innovate in the simplest possible terms to stay ahead of the competition. And that innovation mindset means that we build teams of people who are hungry for whatever is going to give them that competitive advantage. And I have to say that when I was looking at today's agenda and looking at all the social media posts about today's event, I was kind of struck by ICBE's point on their Twitter feed about this deep commitment to continuous improvement. Because if I was to think about a sentence that keeps coming up when you work in Formula One, it's that obsession with continuous improvement. And innovation for us is all about continuous improvement. And going back to the previous session, which hopefully some of you will have seen the previous session, I was very struck by some of that conversation about, is continuous improvement and is innovation, is it big stuff or is it little things? Well, within the world of Formula One, it's a combination of both. Of course, we're looking for the great big innovation that's going to give us a good competitive advantage over the opposition. But we're also very realistic about the fact that our industry is packed full of people looking for the big innovation. So on a day-to-day basis, it actually comes down to all those incremental gains, which we can build into our technologies, our systems, and our processes. Those little marginal gains, there's a concept many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with if you follow sports science closely. Marginal gains, marginal improvements that we can bring to the way in which our teams operate. So what you're looking at in my first slide is, this is our product. This is what a Formula One technology business designs and manufactures in its facility. And if you want to build a competitive Formula One team these days, you're talking about over 1,000 full-time staff who are engaged in designing and manufacturing and creating a great big piece of technology, which happens to be a Formula One car, but is in effect an amalgam of technologies from the world of aerospace, from automotive, and from information technology. So it's partly a jet fighter, it's partly a sports car, it's most definitely a fully connected device. And this digital transformation journey that is proving to be quite a thread today, that's been very much the storyline for Formula One as an industry over the last 35 years. Really half of our history is all about digital transformation. And I quite often say at conferences, when I'm talking to groups of engineers, that if you look at the history of our industry, the 1950s and 60s were about automotive engineering. The 1970s and 80s were about aerospace engineering. And really from the 1990s onwards, the last 30 years have been about digital transformation and the way in which we can connect systems and create a fully connected device, which we can interrogate and generate really deep insights as to its operations and how we can optimize performance, mitigate risk, and guarantee lots of those metrics that are important to us, guarantee really positive outcomes. In the previous session, I was very struck by Richard Serota from Google Cloud talking about, the metrics in a business. And from a Formula One technology company point of view, the metrics that are important to us are absolutely outcomes. And it's outcomes for our internal customers, and it's definitely outcomes for our external customers. We are focused on outcomes. And I would say a kind of takeaway for me from our digital transformation journey, and I'll say this right up front, is that we have guaranteed an optimized outcome across a whole range of metrics within our industry over the last 30 years. And during the course of this presentation, I'm going to share just an insight on just some of those. So this is the technology which we have to create. And as I say, integrating technologies from different sectors means that for our 1,000 plus colleagues working together, we have to find a way to create an extremely lean and efficient workflow so that we create a better product within our budgetary constraints, within our regulatory and compliance framework than the competition. And there is the day-to-day reality of our industry. It's not about the car racing on a Sunday afternoon. It's about the way in which we manage that design, manufacturing, and production of a complex piece of technology, bring it to market within a regulatory framework, and yet somehow find a way to innovate and generate competitive advantage over the competition. So that's kind of really, I suppose, my starter for 10 in terms of giving you an insight to the world of Formula One. I think the next thing really to share with you is that we have deep respect for the competitive landscape that we work within. And I think this is something that all too often gets little discussed, because I speak to a lot of companies who ask me about motivations. How do we get a team of people to utilize tools and technologies in the right way, to innovate, to improve performance, to generate great outcomes? Well, I think it's very important that people take a big step back and look at the picture of your sector, your industry. Who are your competitors? And really step outside of your own business and think about the competition. Who are they? What do they represent? What's their modus operandi? How do they work and think? And what can we learn from that? Again, in the previous session, there was quite a lot of discussion at one point about what we can learn from different sectors of industry. And this is something that within Formula One, we believe very strongly about. I find it interesting how many people will say to me, Formula One's a highly innovative industry. Actually, if you look at the really great innovations within Formula One, most of them have been imported from another sector. We have literally taken the blinkers off and gone into other industries and looked for inspiration, and sometimes motivation, and most definitely the technologies which we can then bring in and reassemble and integrate into the way that we need to operate within our industry. And that leads to the step changes that we're looking for. So this competitive landscape that's just on this slide, that this is our world. We have 10 players in our field, and those 10 players are major companies with a long track record, like Ferrari, for example, who've been in Formula One since 1950. You have a team such as Jordan Grand Prix, who I mentioned earlier on, that well-known Irish team that started 30 years ago today, and they've been rebranded this year as the Aston Martin Formula One teams. The Aston Martin team of 2021 is my old team at Jordan Grand Prix. I then spent a number of years working for Red Bull Racing, and Red Bull is an interesting example of a highly innovative player within the Formula One industry, one which really disrupted our industry. And some of you, I'm sure, have had a can of Red Bull, perhaps over the year. Maybe you had a couple of cans of Red Bull during lockdown to keep you awake during those long hours working from home. But think about the fact that in Formula One, Red Bull is not an energy drinks business. Red Bull bought a Formula One technology company. They own the Formula One team. And I was actually with the management group when we took over that organization. And the Red Bull Racing story is absolutely a story of disruption caused by a new player coming into the Formula One industry, in the case of Red Bull, not being taken seriously by the big players. The automotive industry, I can promise you, didn't regard Red Bull as a big threat when they came into Formula One as a team owner in 2005. And yet 4 years later, that team began to dominate our industry and then won the World Championship for 4 years. And people often say to me, how is it possible for Red Bull to create a better Formula One car than Ferrari or Mercedes-Benz or Honda or Toyota or BMW at the time? And the answer came down to two things. One was the team of people and the culture within which, the way they operated. And the second thing was the innovation mindset. And so once you create that formidable team of people and you combine them with that innovation mindset, which they had, you start to really rock in a positive way. And that's not to say that other Formula One teams don't have great technology or great people. They all do. But it's a way in which you harness that capability and play to your core strengths and share the right vision for the business. And in Red Bull's case, the vision couldn't have been more simply stated right on day one, which was to take some risks, to learn from failure, to continuously improve in a kind of supercharged way, and to constantly challenge established ways of doing things. And that mindset of disrupting, of constantly challenging established ways of doing things has enabled Red Bull in those years to break out of the confines within which I think, frankly, all the competition had been working. Everyone was working within a self-created way of doing things within our industry. And Red Bull really, really disrupted that. So this competitive landscape is extremely important, we think, to focus on, because when we jump out of bed every morning with our mind focused on what we need to achieve today and this week and this month, we have to respect the fact that our competition are doing the same thing. And we somehow have to find a way to collaborate with our colleagues and utilize the tools that are available to us to optimize our performance and jump ahead and do a better job. So that's the kind of the importance of that competitive landscape. And of course, a final point that I'll make about this, and that is that, again, I think Richard from Google Cloud talked about the kind of relentless journey of quarterly results within, corporate world and constantly focused on those sort of 3 monthly, quarterly results. Well, within Formula One, we're focused on results every week, every fortnight. It's relentless. And the results are very public and our failures are very public. And it means that there's no room to hide. And in that, and under that spotlight of ultra competitive, uh, ultra competitive environment that we have, where our successes and our failures are being broadcast around the world. Our product and our product's capability are seen by everyone, including the competition. It means that it becomes a very transparent environment in which we want to analyze our failures, learn from our mistakes, and drive that continuous improvement. Because there's literally no point in us shying away or hiding from the mistakes or the issues that we're having, because of this very public environment within which we're operating. The third thing I really wanted to start off by talking about was this idea of the fact that we compete in the World Championship and what that means for us in terms of managing a big technology project like a Formula One team has to do. And that is that when we look at the Formula One World Championship every year, people tell me it's very glamorous because we get to travel all over the world and go to these great locations. But actually what the Formula One World Championship represents for us is simply 22 or 23 non-negotiable deadlines against which we have to upgrade the hardware and the software within the product which we take to market. Because to win the World Championship, we have to bring an upgraded specification of product to each event. And if you're Mercedes-Benz or Ferrari or Red Bull, there is the focus for your 1,000 people, that every week or every fortnight, you're going to be bringing an enhanced specification of hardware and software to market. And that upgrade is going to be fully compliant within the regulations. It's absolutely, definitely going to be focused on continuous improvement. Otherwise, there's no point in bringing it. So we have this relentless war to improve our performance, to mitigate risk, and to drive quality improvements across all of our engineering projects within our Formula One product. So that's what the Formula One World Championship represents for us. It's not 23 glamorous locations, it's 23 hardware and software upgrades across the season, which are non-negotiable and which our team of people has to innovate around by utilizing the tools that are available to us. So that's the de facto challenge that we have within our industry. And if you were able to come with me to one of our facilities and I was able to walk around and show you the detail of what's involved in running our Formula One technology business, this is what you would find. You would find those 1,000 people designing and manufacturing the many thousands of components which have to be integrated into creating the product which we bring to market. So for the Formula One fans who enjoy our sport, they see a beautiful Formula One racing car. But for us, we see 8,500 components, all of which have to be fully compliant. They have to meet all of the product specifications that have been set for them. They have to be delivered on time, to spec, whenever and wherever in the world is required. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the other challenges for us, because when we look at how Formula One technology teams make our money these days, we make our money by selling capability into industry. So if you're a team like the Williams Formula One team, you're selling technology solutions to Airbus Industries for high altitude satellite drones, solar powered satellite drones. You're selling technology solutions to urban transport companies like Brompton Bicycles. You're working with the automotive industry on the electrification of vehicles. Of course, battery electrification, big topic. Jerry was touching on it earlier on, talking about the revolution that's taking place in the automotive industry. So Formula One very much involved in the move away from fossil fuels in terms of what powers transport, and playing a role in developing some of the lightweight structures and energy efficiency solutions, which are going to play a big role in that transport revolution over the next 10 years. And then finally, working with wide range of clients in lots of different areas, including, in the case of Williams, working with European supermarket chains on developing energy efficiency solutions within their supermarkets so that they can freeze and chill foods much more efficiently than they've done so in the past. And This has been a very interesting project that the Williams team have done, starting with Sainsbury's in the UK and then rolling that out through companies like Walmart and Aldi and Lidl and so on. Now, you weren't expecting me to talk about how Formula One teams are developing technology solutions for Airbus or for Brompton bicycles or for the automotive industry or for supermarket chains. But let me just say, this enables me to introduce the effect that digital transformation has had on our industry. Because as we have embraced this data-driven approach to creating the products which we have to bring to market, in developing a data-driven approach to engineering world-class technology solutions for Formula One, we have learned how to then apply that into wider industry. So what you see here, the detail of what goes into enable us to create world-class Formula One products is absolutely transferable in terms of skills into other sectors. And that means that we have been able to diversify over the last 20 years in a way that's been unprecedented. And there's a really important takeaway here, which is that this digital transformation journey has therefore not only enabled us to generate powerful outcomes within Formula One, but to then transfer that capability into developing powerful outcomes for our customers in a wide range of industries. And I've chosen the Williams Formula One team to talk about in this regard, because if you've happened to follow Formula One, you'll know that Williams are not even a big player within our sport. So my point here is that even a small player like Williams in Formula One now has a diversified technologies business, because our digital transformation journey has enabled us as technology companies to develop insight into any type of challenge that a customer may have, and we can then rapidly engineer solutions for them. And I could talk to you about examples from Red Bull Racing, Red Bull Technologies business. I could talk about examples from McLaren or from Ferrari or from the Mercedes-Benz Formula One team. All of the Formula One teams are exporting their capability into wider industry. And if you really look at the granular detail of why we as technology companies are able to do that, it's been the fact that we have embraced digital transformation in such a way that it has helped us to revolutionize our business model. So we apply our problem-solving techniques irrespective of whether it's a Formula One car, an aircraft for Airbus, an electric bicycle for urban transport, or a battery-powered electric vehicle for transport solutions. And just to emphasize this transformation for us in terms of business, brought about by transformation in terms of the digital landscape, you have to look no further than what's happened in the last 12 months, where we were able to reverse engineer ventilator and breathing aid technologies for the healthcare sector through, and I'm sure some of you will have seen the publicity around this, Formula One teams delivering ventilator and breathing aid technologies into hospitals across Europe over the last year, and people wondering, how can Formula One teams do this? Well, the answer is we can pivot very quickly and deploy our solutions irrespective of whether it's a Formula One car, a ventilator, or any of the other products that I mentioned earlier on. So let's just talk about the use of data within Formula One as a sport and how that has utterly transformed outcomes for us. And I think this whole idea of transforming outcomes is at the core of what we're talking about. When our car is on the track, we are gathering that real-time data from 300 sensors on the vehicle, which enables us to monitor anything that has a temperature or a pressure, anything that's moving, anything that's vibrating. Of course, it also enables us to monitor the performance of the human that's operating the machine. So the driver, all of the inputs of the driver are being monitored real time. Now, though that flow of data is being relayed back to the leadership team. So the leadership team trackside are getting all of that real time information from both our Formula One cars about it, precisely how they're operating real time. And the leadership team are being supported locally at the track by our data analysts. So we have a group of data analysts who are effectively monitoring all of the systems real time, which means that we have the ultimate dashboard. And it's a dashboard that's giving us insight into the performance characteristics of every system on the vehicle. And as I say, also the human operating it. And because we have that from both cars, we have comparative data between both cars in the race. But the real action isn't happening at the track. The real action is happening remotely, because all of our key strategy decisions are not being made trackside. They're being made back at base in our mission control suite. And again, if you came with me to, I don't know, Red Bull Racing in 3 weeks' time for the opening race of the season, I could take you into the mission control suite in the factory in Milton Keynes, and you would see 35 to 40 engineers and software engineers sitting, looking at all that real-time information, which is being processed from the track. The latency is, we're talking about, I think, 25 hundredths of a second for us to get all of that information back from anywhere in the world. We're looking at that information real time. We're crunching all the variables. Our algorithms are essentially punching out millions of potential race strategies for us. And that's where the decisions are made. The decisions are not made trackside. The decisions are made remotely. And those 35 to 40 people, they don't travel to the races. They stay back at headquarters. They look at that data in a cool, calm, and collected way, supported by our software and enabling us to make decisions that guarantee outcomes. And again, this is an extremely important point for us. We have seen a transformation in outcomes because we have the data. And again, a point that Richard made earlier on, Richard from Google Cloud, he talked about the fact that sometimes culture is driven by technological solutions. The culture in Formula One has always been to work together as a team, to be honest and open about where we are, to recognize our mistakes and our failures, to be very analytical about how we approach things. But as you can imagine, not everyone, and certainly not every team, is extremely good at that. The technological change that's happened as a result of digital transformation has absolutely supercharged the cultural change within our industry, because the data that is being shared real time means that there is no argument about our performance. It's there in black and white. We have the information about every system. We have the information about every input that the driver is making to the car. So there is no room for discussion or debate about how we're doing. It's there, it's crystal clear. We have all our data. And of course, we also have the publicly available data from our competitors. And once we combine all of that, we know exactly where we stand. And that means that, again, I go back to the transparency thing. There's no point in Formula One, anyone trying to pull the wool over anyone else's eyes about where we are as a business. It's there, it's in the open, it's clear as day externally to the public, to the media, and to our competitors. And it's certainly very evident to us internally, because we have all of the data to back up precisely where we are at any point in time. So this is the flow of information, and the mission control engineers are back at base in Europe. They are the ones who make the strategy calls, which are then relayed to the track. And then, of course, the driver is advised how he or she needs to drive the race in order to guarantee the result that we're looking for. Now, how does this manifest itself in a kind of real world situation? Well, if you think about someone like Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, people will often say, why is he such a good racing driver? Well, he's a very good racing driver because he's very, very good at following precisely the strategy that our algorithms recommend in terms of the way in which the race needs to be run. So on a Sunday morning, Lewis Hamilton will sit down in a meeting and we will show him absolutely using predictive analytics how the race is going to pan out. And the predictive analytics for this particular race, which I'm going to show you, this shows on the green line that Lewis Hamilton has to make a single pit stop. And as a result of that single pit stop on lap 22, he then needs to simply look after his tires, drive the race at a particular speed. So that speed is actually determined before the race. And if he sticks to the speed and the target that he's given for each lap, he will win the Grand Prix. His two competitors in this race, and we know who his closest competitors are because our simulation tools and our modeling enables us to see who the competition is going to be. His two closest competitors are going to be the red line, which is Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, and the orange line, which is actually Lewis's teammate, Valtteri Bottas. And we know they're both going to make 2 pit stops. And again, we know they will do that because of data that we've gathered during the weekend. So there is Lewis Hamilton's strategy going into a race on a Sunday. The predictive analytics paints a very clear picture of what he needs to do in order to win this race. Now, Lewis being Lewis, and like any red-blooded racing driver, he will say inevitably, what happens if I drive the race as fast as I possibly can? Well, we can show him. If you drive the race absolutely flat out, your tires will wear out about 3 laps before the end of the race. You'll be overtaken by Vettel and Bottas, and you'll finish third. So the question is, Lewis, which strategy would you like? Would you like to go with the optimized strategy, which means you do exactly what you're told and you win the Grand Prix, or you do what you would like to do and be a red-blooded racing driver, in which case you're going to finish third? And not surprisingly, Lewis Hamilton is extremely good at doing precisely the strategy that's going to guarantee him that victory. I was talking to a Mercedes engineer just a couple of weeks ago. He said the best thing about Lewis Hamilton, he's basically like a piece of software. You plug him into the car, you tell him exactly what needs to be done. He goes out and he does it. And that's why he's won 7 world championship titles. So from a Formula One perspective, this data-driven landscape that we operate in has completely revolutionized the way we design our vehicles, the way we manage the operations of them around the world. The quality of the vehicle, the build quality is of a magnitude out of all imagination compared to what it was even just 20 years ago. I'll give you one little metric. So as recently as the year 2000, just 20 years ago, the average car in Formula One was unreliable, was breaking down, suffering reliability problems about 45% of the time. So 55% of the time, pretty good. 45% of the time, basically suffering technology failures of some kind or another. So when people talk to me about the good old days of Formula One, when there was lots of overtaking, there was never lots of overtaking. What there was lots of cars breaking down because reliability was very, very poor. Today in Formula One, a driver like Lewis Hamilton can expect his Formula One car to not let him down a single time in a season. In fact, Lewis's car didn't let him down a single time in 2020. He didn't suffer any failures in 2019. He had one minor failure in 2018. He had no failures at all in 2017. He's gone nearly 5 years without a major technology issue on his vehicle. And that's because our data-driven environment has enabled us to design in the robustness and the reliability into all of our systems. And this means that because we have a robust, reliable product, we have then been able to focus on improving performance and also improving the quality of decision making. And on decision making, this data-driven environment means that we can, for example, decide how we spend our money on research and development. What projects do we undertake? Because when we create our Formula One car, we are creating, first of all, a digital twin before we ever go to manufacture the real thing. And because we have a digital version of our product, we can effectively use predictive analytics to demonstrate what is it worth us developing on that product. And so on any portfolio of projects, we can see what's going to give us some small incremental gains. We can also see where should we spend quite a lot of money on giving us really some big performance increases. And those big performance increases inevitably cost a lot more money, take a longer time to gestate, but we have the analytics to back that up. So even on how we spend our money within research and development projects, we have the information that enables us to make those decisions, and that improves, again, outcomes for us. Now, I just want to finish the presentation by talking about 2 other areas which have been a surprise, I suppose, for for us as a result of the digital transformation journey we've been on within our industry. The first is, let's talk about people. So you take a young driver like Max Verstappen, who has come into Formula One in the last 6 years. He came in as a teenager, 17 years of age, was a very competitive driver, promoted by Red Bull within the first year, won his very first Grand Prix for Red Bull Racing at the Spanish Grand Prix at the age of 18, youngest ever winner in Formula One history. And he was astonishing. And this caused lots of questions. People asked, how is it possible for Red Bull with this young teenager to go out and beat the competition? You know, what's this all about? Is he super talented? But we've got lots of other talented drivers. So what's the unique quality? Well, actually, Max answered the question in quite a surprising way, because he was sitting in a press conference one day and a journalist asked him, how is it possible for you as a teenager to be so competitive in Formula One when you've never done it before? You're new to this environment. You've never visited these countries before. You've not raced on these racetracks before. And Max said, well, actually, you're wrong. He said, I'm afraid to say, he said, I'm actually something of a veteran. He said, I started racing in Formula One when I was about 4. And of course, the journalists were all looking at each other. And he said, yeah, when I was about 4, he said, my mother bought me a Sony PlayStation and I got the Formula One game. And he said, you know, the Formula One game that's made by Sony is actually built using the data that the teams provide to Formula One under the licensing agreement. So it's effectively a simulation tool. And he said, you know, I've been racing in Formula One for 14 years. He said, I've been, I've done the Monaco Grand Prix probably 8,000 times. He said, I will win the Japanese Grand Prix. And the journalist said, how do you know you'll win in Japan? And Max said, well, because I always do. I always win on PlayStation. So I'm pretty confident, I'll win in the real world. And of course, this caused much amusement, but this is a very important point, because for our drivers, for our fans, for our customers around the world, Formula One has had to wake up to the fact that this is a completely online community. And what we do in the real world is now replicated in a virtual environment. And for someone like Max Verstappen, online gaming, computer gaming is second nature to him. Functionality and applications and connectivity and using this connected environment to drive, in his case, entertainment, but also great outcomes for him as a driver is second nature to him. Now, this has been a really interesting chapter in Formula One that's evolved over the last decade or so. And so a driver like Max Verstappen will step on board his Formula One car and he'll look at the steering wheel and he'll say, actually, it's not really a steering wheel. It's a mobile device. It's just something that gives me functionality, applications, connectivity that enables me to optimize performance, to mitigate risk, and to move to the next level. I mean, if we're going to talk about continuous improvement, let me tell you that the reason why that Formula One steering wheel has got so much functionality on it is that the driver wants to be able to continuously improve throughout the race. And because they're driving in this data-rich environment, that data-rich environment creates an ecosystem within which they can constantly transform their performance, corner to corner, lap to lap, across the entire Grand Prix. And there is the mental sort of dexterity required of Grand Prix drivers today, is to use all of those technologies and all of that functionality in such a way that it actually enables them to continuously improve their performance through the race. We train Formula One drivers in the simulator, and we use a virtual environment to prove our strategies, to prove how our drivers can drive each track, to take all of the guesswork out of outcomes. So the outcomes that we're looking for in Formula One today are not involving a journey of hope, a journey of trial and error. Our outcomes today in Formula One are a journey of knowledge, a journey of information, a journey of insight into how we know we can perform in any given environment with the technology that we have available to us. And so there is the reason why, when you look at this little video, the simulator environment that we operate in, ahead of the 2021 season, which starts in 3 weeks' time, we are going to be conducting a total of 3 days of physical testing before we start that World Championship calendar. Now, some of you will be maybe old enough and wise enough, if you follow Formula One, to remember that as recently as 15, 20 years ago, for us to race in Formula One, we would undertake about 120 days of physical testing. We would actually test our product in the real world for 120 days of physical testing before we would commence the Formula One season. Today, we do 3 days of physical testing because all of the proving of our technologies has been done in the virtual environment. And this means that we have reduced our costs significantly. In real terms today, we are spending much less money than we were historically. So we have a much more efficient way of producing this technology and bringing it to market. And quite frankly, those 3 days of testing that we're doing this coming weekend are not to prove the technology, they're actually to allow the human drivers to have the opportunity to try the car out before the season starts. One final thing to share with you is that this virtual environment, where we can simulate the racing, where we can enjoy online racing, means that during the course of the COVID crisis, we've been able to pivot the whole World Championship online. And as a result, we now have a virtual World Championship. And this is unlocking a huge business opportunity for Formula One as a sport as we engage with online gamers around the world. About 30 million of them watching each of the virtual World Championship events that we have online. And these are young audiences, typically Gen Z, not even millennials, typically Gen Z, even Gen Alpha, engaged with Formula One online because of that virtual racing environment which we have created. So one of our big takeaways, therefore, is that as we have merged the real world of racing with the virtual environment, which we've created over the last 30 years, we have created an astonishing business opportunity, which we're only now beginning to fully recognize. And just to finish the presentation, let's just talk about the human factor, because all of the technologies that I've been referring to and this digital transformation journey that we've been on is actually all about people. So technologies in Formula One are not about making the technologies the focus. The focus is on the people and the teams and enabling them to generate the performance that we're looking for. So the technology solutions are simply tools that enable our teams of people to do extraordinary things. And the fact, again, going back to Richard's point, the fact that technological evolution has enabled us to develop our culture because we have the data in black and white. That means that we can be honest and transparent and open about our mistakes and our failures, which means that we can drive that continuous improvement. We don't blame people in Formula One when we have issues. We blame the problem because the problem is illustrated by the data. The data illustrates what the problem is. So we don't blame a person, we blame the problem. And that's, again, a manifestation of the way in which this digital environment has allowed us to focus on what's really important and how to learn from our mistakes and our failures. So this photograph is of a typical town hall meeting in a Formula One team. They happen every week. Attendance is mandatory. In the case of Mercedes-Benz Formula One, Lewis Hamilton will host the town hall meeting. And in that town hall meeting, you're sharing where we are, the good things that are happening, the bad things that are happening. Where are we with our project plan? Are we on track to develop that hardware and software upgrade, which we need to bring to the next race? What were our failures last weekend that we can learn from so that we can improve next time out? So there's the reality of our environment. It's about taking teams of people and utilizing technologies to give them insight as to how they can improve performance. And even in something like a Formula One pit stop, because we have the data from every pit stop, from all of the pit equipment being used on the Formula One car during the pit stop, we actually have been able to build up an incredibly accurate, granular picture of what happens during a Formula One pit stop. And that means that teams like Red Bull have been able to reduce pit stop times to less than 2 seconds for every single pit stop. Now, 2 seconds to service our product in the field is a pretty remarkable outcome. But be absolutely clear, the 22 people who work in a Formula One pit stop are not some, superhumans. They are ordinary people like you and me. They are mechanics first and foremost. And yet these ordinary colleagues are being asked to do something extraordinary, which is to undertake 36 tasks in less than 2 seconds. Now, it seems impossible when you state that. But as I go right back to the beginning of my presentation, when a company like Red Bull comes into Formula One and says, our goal is to win the world championship, our goal is to disrupt, our goal is to challenge established ways of doing things, this represents just one of those tasks that has to be revolutionized. So in the case of Red Bull, gather the data from every pit stop, put sensors on the car, on the pit equipment, and on the mechanics, gather that granular detail, sit down, analyze it, work out how to improve the performance work out how to improve the process, and then working out how to improve the process, then focus on improvements to training. And then suddenly you see major step changes coming in terms of performance. And so when you see a Formula One pit stop done in 1.8 seconds, you don't automatically think about this as a digital transformation journey. And yet digital transformation is what has enabled a team of human beings to do a pit stop in 1.8 seconds. So it's a perfect example for me of what happens when you take technology and you use that technology as an enabler for people and give people the opportunity to be the best version of themselves, to create amazing outcomes for themselves and for customers by embracing the opportunity that's afforded through the digital transformation journey. So I'm going to stop there. Very happy to take some questions from you and hopefully give you any other insights from this wonderful world of Formula One that I've been enjoying working in all these years. Thank you.
Well, I tell you what, Mark, you're gonna have your work cut out when it comes to all the questions, because there's quite a few, but I'll rattle through as many as I can. Would Hamilton have beaten Schumacher with like for like technology? Throw in Senna and Fangio while you're at it, Mark.
I think he would have done because, I worked with Michael, and he is, he made his debut for Jordan Grand Prix 30 years ago. I think one of the really interesting things about Michael and Ayrton Senna is that they were amazing drivers, but they quite often stepped over the edge in terms of what was acceptable behavior. And that's something that we haven't seen from Lewis Hamilton. Now, there are people who argue that that's the case because Lewis has had the superior car. But actually, looking at the detail of it, Lewis is just simply a formidably consistent driver. And as I go back and quote that engineer I was speaking to recently, he is just like a piece of winning software. They plug him into the car, he goes out and he wins for them. So I think in a like for like car, I think, we might give Lewis the nod, but it's an unanswerable question because, as you and I know, Anton, if you compare drivers from different eras, different technology, different generations, you're comparing apples and oranges because things have changed so dramatically over the last 70 years.
Question saying, in terms of the digital transformation of the years, how has the volume of data collected during an F1 race increased in the past years? And what kind of systems has the F1 industry implemented to handle this increased level of data? And are the data management systems also regulated, as in do racing regs apply to them to keep a level playing field?
Yeah, really, good question. So I'm going to give you, I'll give you literally a couple of data points. So if you go back to 2000, so if you go back 20 years ago, Formula One teams typically were generating, Formula One cars were generating about 500 megabytes of data during a Grand Prix. I mean, a tiny amount of information compared to today. Today we're talking about 300 gig. So, that gives you sort of an order of magnitude of the amount of data which the cars are generating. Of course, we have 2 cars. A couple of companies that would be familiar to delegates in Ireland, Jordan Grand Prix was supported by Hewlett Packard, and also we had we had our own data center. Can you believe that? We had our own data center, which was built for us in partnership with EMC. And I remember very well done in determining that we needed, a massive 2 terabytes of data back in 2000. Well, of course, today, we have that sitting in the garage with us, on a portable basis at every race. And of course, you can imagine we have in specifics to the question. The first thing to say is that if you go on the website of any Formula One team, let's take McLaren, for example. The first thing you notice is their information technology partners. And every team has them. And be it McLaren with Dell, or be it Aston Martin with Cognizant, who've just become their title sponsor, every Formula One team seems to have their big information technology partners. And those partners will be hardware, software, cybersecurity, covering all the bases. We then have the fact that we have regulations about data, because all of our data that's generated by the cars has to be available for the governing body to scrutinize. So we actually hand over and share all of our data with the governing body. They have full sight of that. And that's to make sure that there's no dirty business going on, that we're not cheating the system. So all the data is provided to the governing body. However, all of the data transmissions are, of course, being encrypted, so that fans and any other potentially disreputable characters can't hack in to our system. So the whole aspect of data security is absolutely critical to us. A little known fact about Formula One, but one that's probably worth sharing, is that the largest financial penalty in sporting history involved the theft of data within Formula One. And that was when a disgruntled employee stole all of the designs from the Ferrari Formula One team and provided them to the McLaren Formula One team back in 2007, 2008. And that led to McLaren being fined $100 million for receiving that information. So Spygate, as it was known, was a really pivotal moment in Formula One history, where the digital transformation journey took on a completely new dimension, because the theft of data took center stage in what became the biggest financial penalty, as I say, in sporting history. So I can promise you, Anton, if you meet the CIO of any Formula One team, probably number one on their agenda is protecting the data, never mind what else we do with it.
A couple of questions around the business. Interesting one saying, for businesses, surely these are very expensive platforms compared to the vast amount of money in F1. Can I ask about the expensive platforms, but also another question, which is, Ferrari famously began to sell road cars 100 and something years ago, or 80 plus years ago, to fund the racing team. How much of the racing teams now are in existence to allow for those broader business endeavors, or is the focus still the track?
So during my presentation, I talked about the way in which we've diversified our businesses over the last 20 years. And there is the growth area. So it's selling technology solutions into the wider industry, and it's also selling products, and that's selling products and services. Now, be that Ferrari selling road cars, be it Williams selling technologies to Airbus, be it McLaren selling data analytics solutions into industry. We're all selling something at the end of the day, and that's where the action is for the businesses. The other thing that's really changed over the last sort of 25, 30 years is that our business model, where we used to sell sponsorship, has gone from being the core way for us to generate money. That's now become very much secondary. So we still generate sponsorship in Formula One, but it's nothing like the magnitude that it used to be. So we have a much broader, diverse range of revenue streams that are principally based on us selling technology goods and services, and also monetizing the sport in terms of media platforms and media rights to fans around the world. Going back to the question there, I didn't quite get about the expense of the platform. Was that what they were asking?
Yeah, that is it justifiable, and is it hugely expensive for
No.
effectively for analyzing data from a motor race?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the thing is, I mean, it was, I mean, hugely expensive. I mean, I can promise you that from a budgetary perspective, what we spend in Formula One on what we might generically call information technology is a fraction of what we're spending on the research and development for the racing cars. I mean, in a typical budget of about 100, so this year we are operating to a budget cap. So every Formula One team now has a budget cap of $145 million. Our information technology budget within that's probably going to be $12 to $15 million a year. So actually not a huge proportion. I mean, significant, but nothing like what you might think. We're probably spending more like 3 times that on aerodynamic development, for example.
And is that done digitally, or is that still wind tunnel?
Both. So we have both. I mean, what's really interesting is that I mean, I've spent the last 25 years with people saying to me, we will eventually abandon wind tunnels and develop the cars purely digitally. No one has yet managed to do that in such a way that it has translated perfectly onto the racetrack. So the validation that goes through a wind tunnel program absolutely remains critical. And it's important, therefore, that whatever we're seeing in terms of our computer simulations is validated in the wind tunnel before we ever go to the racetrack. And that simply comes down to the complexity of the airflows and the dynamics that are happening with the car on the track.
Can I ask you one potentially insulting question? Indulge me, Mark. To some extent, is it easier in an environment which is rules-based? You have spending cap limits, you have regulations in relation to the engineering and the technology, you have a set amount of tires, set amount of days, so you can give it your all within those parameters. Is that slightly easier than saying, build a car that'll sell to the world?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. So there's no doubt that we have to do what we have to do, and there is literally a rule book to which we have to follow. However, what I would say to you is that if you look at the innovators within Formula One, if you take a guy like Adrian Newey, who is technical director at Red Bull Racing, what Adrian will say to you is he'll say, yes, I've got my rule book and I have that compliance and I have to build the car for that. But actually, what Adrian loves doing is reading the regulations, first of all, for what they do say, and secondly, for what they don't say. And Adrian sees that as the opportunity, the opportunity to innovate is the thing that the regulator hasn't thought about. And I'll give you one very small kind of example of that, which happened in 2020, which was that the Mercedes-Benz Formula One team turned up with a car in which the steering wheel not only turned left and right, but also you could pull it towards you or push it away like an aircraft joystick. And of course, everyone said, what the heck does that do? And it turned out that what Mercedes-Benz had done was to develop a steering wheel that as you pull it towards you or push it away from you, that actually would adjust the suspension geometry on the front of the car, which means that Lewis Hamilton and his teammate could actually physically adjust the suspension setup corner to corner by not only turning, but also pushing or pulling. Now, the thing is, Anton, the regulator has never thought of that. So therefore, it's not illegal. And when Mercedes-Benz, telephoned the regulator and said, look, we've had a bright idea. We think this is pretty cool. Regulator had a look at it, and the regulator said, guys, if you want to go for it, go for it. Now, we think it's probably not got a lot of applications for the car industry. So, we're not sure this is transferable, but away you go. And that's what Lewis Hamilton and his teammate were using last season. And for me, it was a beautiful example of where the innovators in Formula One don't just stick to the prescribed rules and regulations. They're constantly thinking about where else they can go to. And a final punchline to that story is it'll come as no surprise to know that the chief technology officer at Mercedes-Benz F1 is a very, very keen amateur pilot, and so he loves his aircraft and he loves his fast jets, and that's where he got the idea from, to have a Formula One steering wheel that operated in a slightly different way.
There's far more questions, unfortunately, Mark, than we could possibly get to. But one that I think is just an intriguing sort of almost side note in relation to the business and the way it's funded. Are the digital partners paid, or is it in lieu of advertising? As in, do you do deals for the name on the car?
So what the digital partners are doing is building case studies. And I mean, I'll give you an example. When I brought Hewlett Packard into Formula One with Jordan, we were at the very dawn of wireless telemetry. And I mean, we had hardwired telemetry where the car physically had to come into the garage and you'd plug into it and download data. But in the mid-90s, HP came in with us and we said to them, right, we need wireless telemetry and we need to be able to download that data from wherever the car is on the track and analyze it. And so HP took that on as a technical showcase of their capability. And then within 2 years, because we were starting to generate reasonable volumes of data, HP introduced us to EMC, and EMC came to us and said, actually, we want to develop a showcase in terms of data management, data storage, data security. So what you're finding is with all of these technology partners, what the Formula One teams do is they sit down with them and they say, well, look, here's something that we need. Does that fit into your global marketing in terms of showcasing capability? And of course, if you have the right conversation with them, you know, you'll work out a program which means that it's a win-win for everyone. The Formula One team gets leading edge technology, and the information technology company gets a showcase which they can utilize around the world.
Mark, just as a final question, I want to get your very brief views on the lessons that you would have learned from Formula One that could inform other industries, because obviously you've been involved with various different industries over the years. And if there's anything where you'd say, well, look, there's one or two simple, vital things that I've found that are easily transferable, either in terms of culture or approach. And just a reminder, by the way, folks, we have Kieran Noonan going to be joining us in just one tick. And if there are questions you want to add at the end, just for a summary, do get them in. And everything, including all that Mark has said, is going to be available on the platform for the next year. Yes, Mark, final words then, things that you could shift across.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit unoriginal and go back to something that I think it was Taron Lent said earlier on in the previous session. And he talked about the importance of learning from your failures. And it's something that in Formula One, we are quite obsessed with. And when we have our daily meetings, we really look at where we haven't succeeded. And we have an incredibly strong focus on that. And it sounds negative, but it's not, because we relish the opportunity to see where we're missing. Because once we absolutely share that, we start to make progress. And I've worked in teams where people didn't want to talk about their failures. You learn nothing. I mean, you just keep repeating the same old mistakes. So we have this obsession about failure. The other thing that's quite interesting is that I think risk is a bad word in industry. Generally, people are quite risk averse, and some industries are much more risk averse than others. Within Formula One, we relish risk, and what that means is that we don't bet the whole company on it, but we will take calculated risks in a particular way that is then scalable. So if we take a risk, try something, and find a good outcome, we can then scale that, and we scale very, very quickly. So those two topics of failure and risk, actually, weirdly enough, turn out to be quite powerful factors within determining success within our industry.
What a lovely note to end on. Mark, thank you very much. That is Mark Gallagher. We'll take a quick break and then we'll be straight back with Kieran Noonan.
Thanks so much.